often ask my guests during these podcast discussions, what's one leadership book that has remained on your bookshelf and that has endured the test of time? I recently asked myself that same question, and although I have quite a few leadership books on my bookshelf, there's one that always comes to the top of the list. And that book is entitled The Leadership Challenge by Barry Posner and Jim Kouzes. Now, I purchased my first edition of Leadership Challenge back in probably 1990. It got released in 1987 while I was still in commercial banking. Today, that same book is in its seventh edition and remains on my bookshelf and should be on yours as well. I had a chance to invite Dr. Barry Posner to a discussion around leadership and what's changing and what has endured the test of time. Now, interestingly enough, I met Barry when I was a freshman at Santa Clara University back in 1979. It's absolutely hard to believe. Dr. Posner was a newly hired faculty member in the Levy School of Business. And since that time, he and his co-author, Jim Kouzes, have been recognized as top leadership experts in the world. And they've published numerous books and articles on leadership truths, why we need to lead more from the heart, why that connection is so important, and what leadership practices we need to continue, not only today, but in the years ahead. I had the pleasure of reconnecting with Barry for an interesting discussion on leadership. In addition to talking about those enduring truths, we talked about how do we engage our team members more proactively, why integrity is so critically important today. You know, we talked about culture, creativity, and even his latest book. He gave a glimpse into the book that he's writing with Jim that's very much focused on keeping your promises as a leader, the importance of integrity. I think you'll find this discussion to be quite insightful, relevant, and wise. I'm your host, Tom Athenauer, and you're listening to the Leader to Leader podcast, where we bring leaders from all walks of life to share learnings, perspectives, wisdom on how we all can up our game in the leadership world. So let's jump into our conversation. Welcome, Dr. Barry Posner.
Well, thank you, Tom. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. You know, we were just talking in the prep just a little while ago about you started at Santa Clara in the School of Business back in 1976. I was a freshman in 77. And I absolutely remember you, despite a year and a half in the School of Sciences, or, just wasn't working over there. I switched to the School of Business, and I remember you vividly. So we've known each other a while. So,
well, it's nice to be remembered. So thank you.
Today, I'd love to jump into some of those topics that are most relevant to our listeners based upon our leadership work, and to kind of get your insights on where things are going and what's most important for leaders to focus in on. So if you're good with that, that's kind of the trajectory.
Let's talk.
Okay, super. So give me a little bit about how did you get to the whole university world and teaching, and because that's your passion, right?
How did you get there? Yeah, I don't know how far back you want to go, but I'll tell you, you make sense of your life sometimes by thinking about the past and kind of connecting the dots. But my I think my forte into leadership really started as a kid. My parents owned a small shoe store in Claremont, California, and I learned after school daycare for me was going back to the store after school and sitting in the back doing my homework. As I got older, I got to, clean the bathrooms. I got to wrap gifts. I got to clean inventory. Eventually, I got to wait on, write receipts, make checks. I mean, all those kinds of things. But I learned about customer service. I think that's what I want to say. I learned about what I didn't think about as leadership then, but what it was I had to ask myself, if you will, as a salesperson, how do I listen to what other people need, and how do I use myself and the resources we have here to make other people feel better? Now, this is in the context of shoes, but it's the same principle. It's the same principle of what we call servant leadership is what do I do to make other people better? And how do I listen carefully enough to them to be able to know that, and then figure out, well, what do I have to offer? When to sort of say, how can I help? What is it that I have to offer? And so I'll just give you that piece of insight of kind of learning about customer service as a key to what leadership is really all about.
So was that, did you know that you wanted to go this route, or? and
Oh
work?
no, no. I'm a first
Because there's
generation
a
college.
curiosity, right? There's a lot of curiosity. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I would have been happy to be in retailing early on in my life, but
Yeah.
a first generation college student. My parents owned this small shoe store. What was I going to do? I was going to go to college, something that they hadn't done. I was going to be a lawyer or a doctor. Uh, I am a doctor, but not the kind my mom thought I was going to be. You know, uh, so so yeah, so uh, I went. I didn't. I didn't think about. I mean, the best leaders are those that aren't trying to, and aren't in some ways trying to be the leader. They it's through their behavior. Other people be look. We talk about leadership being a relationship between those who
Yes.
would choose to lead and those who would choose to follow. But most importantly, what determines whether you're a leader or not is whether or not you have people that follow you.
Hmm.
And so over the course of my early life and then into my professional life, there were people who would turn to me or would follow me, or I had an idea and people resonated with it. And you know what happens when you have an idea? People say, "Hey, that's a good idea. Why don't you do something with that?" And then it was,
Yes.
"Well, I can't do this alone. If you think that's a good idea." I mean, here, when I was dean of the business school, when I first became dean of the business school, I'd been at Santa Clara for maybe 50, maybe 20 years. So, and I was the first person at Santa Clara University in 150 years history of the institution that had ever been promoted from within to become a dean. And and very shortly after I was announced that I had been appointed the dean, a number of my colleagues came to me with ideas. We had been friends, and said, "Hey, Barry, you should do something about this. You do something about this. You should do something about this." And so one of the first things I did was every time somebody came to me with one of those ideas, I made them the associate dean in charge of that idea. I said,
Oh,
"Hey,
brilliant.
like Tom, that's a great idea. We should really do something about that curriculum issue. I'm going to make you the associate dean in charge of that curriculum issue. What do you need from me to be able to make that happen? Because you're obviously passionate about it, and I don't deny that it's important, but I can't do all that stuff by myself." Um, and I would think that the success that I enjoyed when I was the dean was because I was a good listener, uh, and there were lots of good ideas in the organization, and my job was to help people do. My job was to help people do extraordinary things.
Yeah. And it also was really around challenging that person that came with the great idea to say, you've got energy, you got passion. Let them own it and run with it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. That's always been important.
So you're still chairperson, chairman of the Department of Leadership and Management at Santa Clara, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Excellent. And you're in the heart of Silicon Valley. So we have listeners from around the world that log in, and sort of the Silicon Valley is the hub of the Magnificent Sevens and all those folks that are in the high tech world and are what I consider to be a little bit on that epicenter of where things are moving fast and the pacing around that. So you've been there for quite some time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we've seen the valley turn into be a harvest of fruits, real apples,
Yes.
to you know to chips and other kinds of things.
Yeah. It's just a fascinating sort of that being at that area of the world where so much technology was birthed and created and that innovation and all of that. Or you bring a context that is fairly significant. So we have young leaders that listening in that are emerging. We have mid-market, kind of not mid-market, mid-level leaders, and
Mhm.
we have senior and executives. I work with different levels around that. And everybody's sort of asking the question around, where is leadership going? What are you seeing as the areas that we as leaders need to be zeroed in on? And I'm curious around sort of what do you see given the climate, the context in which organizations and leaders are having to navigate today? Where do leaders need to be zeroing in?
Um, well, uh, let me take this opportunity to plug our newest book, Tom.
Okay, perfect. You go
Last
for it.
last last in last month in May, we published second edition of a book called Encouraging the Heart. We'd written the first edition of it in the late 1990s. And so, 30 years, nearly 30 years later, what motivated us to write a second edition of that book. And here's kind of here's kind of the theme of an important issue in that book, and I think it's relevant today, and that is encouraging the heart is one of what we call the 5 practices of exemplary leadership. Encouraging the heart speaks to the relationship that leaders need to have with their constituents. And really the crying issue these days, regardless of your politics, is that people want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be recognized, they want to be appreciated, and so our politicians and our non-elected political, our non-elected leaders, leaders these days need to be able to touch people in the sense of saying, I see you, and I hear you, and I feel the pain that you're having, and I want to try to do something about that. That's that connection that leaders need to make. And of our 5 practices, encouraging in some ways is the most personal, because it requires you to get close enough to people to have those honest conversations about how people are feeling, even in this virtual world, to be able to figure out how people are feeling, and then to be kind of responsive to that. What's turning people off these days and what's causing them to leave organizations is this notion that they're not being seen. I mean, we came across a study just the other day talking about, everybody's stressed out these days, and
Right.
for all kinds of reasons. And one of the ways that you deal with that is through human connections. Part of the stress is not just the feeling that things are out of control, but it's that we're not connected. And encouraging the heart is one of our principal leadership practices. Speaks to that very human need, that heart, that you have to connect, not just hands and head, but you have to connect with people's heart, especially in turbulent times. And even giving critical feedback is encouragement.
Yes.
The reason I'm telling you these things, Tom, is because I care about you. Because
Yeah.
I want you to be better, and you can't be better unless people are willing to challenge you and to push you and to stretch you. And we're in a world today in which we're all being stretched. And we need to know that we can't, that we don't have to do it alone. We can't do it alone.
Yeah, it's because that was, I think, if I remember the 5 practices, it was like number 5, wasn't it 5? Kind of
Well,
modeled away, and
yeah,
then
we
it
try
was
not to
5.
say it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it's the 5th.
Right.
But when we write in the leadership challenge, it's the one we write about
The most, right?
5th. Yeah.
And you have written subsequent books around truth and credibility, and kind of unpacking some of those practices and going a little bit deeper on that, which is quite interesting. And encouraging the heart in its second edition coming out and later this year. Is that what you said?
No, it came out in May 6th.
Came out in May. Awesome. Okay, cool. So this encouraging the heart. Let's spend a little bit of time on that. I'm a leader that I'm under pressure. I'm operating in this sea of uncertainty. There is a natural tendency for a lot of these leaders is they pull things back, where they take control, or they move into some of those reactivities that are really counter. They compete against one's ability to connect with others. How do you suggest that leaders keep that top of mind? What can they particularly do, almost like to practice that connection piece?
Yeah, I think here's the sense. Somehow, from your year and a half in the College of Arts and Sciences, you may have learned, something that's if I could say, here's power. Here's my power and my influence. And there is a feeling on the part of some people like, well, this is what I have, and if I give any of it away, I'll have less. But the truth of the matter is that it's really more like electricity. It's all around us, and you're trying to tap into all of the energy, so that in fact, it's almost counterintuitive. It's by in some ways by sharing information, you get more information back.
Yeah.
Uh, I think it's a myth of control that if I hold on to all this stuff, I'll be in control. Well, these days there's so many things going on, you can't control everything. And at least one of the most positive outcomes from the COVID pandemic is that when given the opportunity, the demand, when people had to take responsibility and do things, they did them. And when you couldn't rely upon the hierarchy to make decisions because you had to make them fast, people stepped up and did what was necessary. And I think we need to kind of remember that in continuing in these times. We don't call it COVID, but there must be another disease of these times.
Yeah.
Uh, and people need to say, look, there, you talked about truths. Here's at least two truths. You make a difference, but you can't do it alone. So the truth is, you know, what I do and who I am and what I do is important, and we'll talk about credibility. That's important. Um, but it um, but nobody came into the shoe store to make my family rich. People didn't say, "Hey, I have some money. Why don't I go down to their shoe store and give it to them?" They came down there because they had a need, and they thought maybe we could satisfy it. So so what we need to do, part of what we need to do is we need to in fact expand the information that we provide others, so that they can become more competent. We call that enabling others to act. They can become more competent, more confident, um, and in that sense can become more responsible. You can't expect people to be responsible for things that they can't do anything about. Um, so we want to. One of my favorite stories, a few years ago, had to do with one of these high technology companies that wasn't doing very well. They fired the CEO, and the board promoted the CFO to become, said, well, you you're the best person now to take over this company.
Hmm.
And the
Yep.
CFO said, look, this is an engineering kind of company. I'm not really qualified to make those kinds of decisions. And the board said, well, we don't need you to make the technical decisions. There's all kinds of people to do that. We need you to provide leadership. And one of the things that this fellow did to provide that leadership was he said, okay, he got everybody together. He got all, senior levels of people together and said, well, how many of you think you're not very competent? Nobody raised their hand. He said, well, then how come we're not doing very well? How come the company's not doing very well? If we look around and it's not our fault, we're really terrific, but the company's sucking. So what do we do? So he said, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna increase by tenfold right now, by tenfold your financial budget authority. So you can, here, we're in the midst of trouble, but I want you to feel like you can spend 10 times more than you now can without anybody's permission. Well, all of a sudden, people had all of this ability to do things, and they didn't need to do them. They just went out and did stuff. And um, and the same thing happened. What happened? I take that example for me in the school when we gave the administrative assistants the budgets instead of the department chair managing the budget, gave it to the administrative assistants, and all of a sudden they became responsible. They figured out ways to pool their resources. They started sharing things. They started being responsible for the bottom line because now they owned it. Um, and and I think we have this fear when kind of there's things going on that we don't exactly know what's going to happen. We kind of want to circle the wagons. On the other
Yes.
hand, this might just be again, it seems scary, um, but the only way we're going to be successful is if we're all successful. So
You've hit on several things that I want to circle back to. One, the lessons learned from COVID. There were some fascinating leadership lessons learned in COVID. And one of the things that I heard you say was that we were navigating uncharted waters. And so there was this no, it was unprecedented, some of the decisions that organizations and leaders had to make. And so it's like that control, we didn't know what to do. And so we had to reach out to others in a more collective way and see, how do we navigate this, because this has not happened before. And I think that that was a learned lesson, that we don't want to lose the lesson that we learned, because there was huge wisdom in that lesson. So I'm hearing that. Is that what you're
yeah,
saying?
yeah,
You're releasing the control of having to know the answer because
absolutely.
we
And there
didn't
was
know it,
there was a
right?
lot of speed that happened. We had a
Yeah.
major healthcare system here. That one of the senior fellow was telling me, before COVID, we spent more than kind of 12 to 18 months trying to think about how we could do video medical calls.
Yes.
How we could do
Yeah.
virtual stuff. We spent 18 months, and then we had a 1 year plan how we were going to implement it. And then COVID hit, and 3 weeks later we were doing it. You know, and um, you talk about kind of Silicon Valley. I mean, there's this sense of of a willingness to learn quickly, and the only way that you learn quickly is your willingness to try things, and with a point of view of learning. And again, we call that challenging the process from a leadership perspective.
Yes. Yep.
Leaders aren't trying to make mistakes. Leaders are trying to get better, and the process of getting better means you have to do things you haven't done before, and not all of them are going to be successful. And so you just move. You just sort of say, okay, we tried that didn't, it's not that didn't work. It's rather, what did we learn from that experiment? Now, as a scientist, what did we learn from that, so that we can do better in this next episode? um, you know when organizations put out a new product. So if you're in the retail business, a new product in the grocery store, you don't roll it out to 1,000 stores across the nation. You roll it out in, I don't want to offend any of your friends, in South Dakota. You roll it out in Minneapolis. You roll it out in a
Yeah.
in a region, in an area, and you try it, and you see what happens, and you learn from that pilot, that demonstration, and then you figure out what you need to do to roll it out on a big time basis.
Yeah.
So
I
um,
yeah, I think the second theme that I want to kind of circle back, because it's related to what you were just talking about, rolling it out in pilots, is this extending the freedom to make decisions, which is really what you did at Santa Clara with the assistant dean model, but also that organization you were just referencing around going, hey, we're going to increase your budgeting authority or your purchasing authority by tenfold. It's,
yeah,
you're extending that freedom because you have belief that they know how, and then course correct if you need to. It's not failure, right? Because we spend a lot of time talking about there is no failure in an agile organization, but you have to extend it first.
yeah, and
That's a
you don't have to. It's not like you're just sort of saying, well, look, everybody do whatever you want.
right.
It might be a conversation that I'm having, that I say, so look, Tom, what do you think we need to do here? And why do you think we need to do that? And who have you talked to about that, to kind of get their buy-in? I mean, there's still a lot of coaching that goes on this, but it's all about making sure that kind of the proverbial monkey is on your back and not on my back, so that when you walk out of my office, you're not saying, well, Barry, the boss, asked me to do this, and so if it doesn't work, we know who to blame. Rather, when you walk out of the office, you're saying, okay, this, I own this. And now Barry suggested a couple things that I need to kind of think about and make sure I kind of check the boxes on. Um, so I didn't just dump a problem on you. I mean, I delegated, but delegated in a way that enabled you to be a leader yourself.
Yeah. We're working with this one client where they're really trying to create a culture of freedom with accountability, meaning that
Mhm.
extending the freedom to make, kind of be innovative, try new things, challenge the process, right? To use your language, and yet still be accountable, but it's really extending that freedom, which is a release of the control,
Yeah.
which really is what you're talking about, right?
Well, and you have to be, here's the death of innovation is when somebody says, "Look, I want you to experiment, but I don't want you to make any mistakes." And it's
Yeah.
like, well, no, those I can't innovate if I will make some mistakes. And in healthcare, what they find is that the most innovative organizations are those in some ways that make the most mistakes because they learn the most. If we make mistakes and don't share them with anybody, then we keep making those. Then other parts of the organization, we keep making those same mistakes over and over again because we hide them. We don't let anybody know about those mistakes. If we share those, then hopefully we're not making the. Hopefully we're always making new mistakes. We're not making the old mistakes. We're learning and we're pushing ourselves, and in the process, we'll make we'll have some other setbacks.
Yeah.
Um, but we really want to. I mean, even when we close out a product line because it didn't work. I mean, sometimes it didn't work because we were ahead of the marketplace. We see that a lot here in Silicon Valley. We just the market wasn't ready for it, or the technology wasn't quite ready for it. But 5 years later, 10 years later, there it is, and you made $1 billion. So
Yeah. Yeah. Two truths that you said: you matter, communicating that, and number two, can't do it alone. Those were the two things you zeroed in on that are
mhm.
common sort of truths. When you say you matter, meaning it's the leaders, sort of, if the leader focused on, first of all, believing that they matter. I mean, there's also that's kind of like job one,
Yeah,
which we think that leaders all believe that they matter, but that we're not seeing that necessarily as the case. There's almost like you have to have that genuine belief that I matter and you matter, and we are in this together, so we can't do it alone. That is really, is that what you're suggesting?
well, yeah, and if you and what keeps I matter from being hubris is
Yes.
the recognition that I can't do it alone. So,
There you go.
well, look, look, somebody's got to raise their hand and start the conversation. Somebody's got to go first. And so somebody goes, well, uh, here's an idea, and that's an exercise in leadership. Here's an idea. Here's a way that we might be able to go. Maybe that's going to work. Um, it's a kind of thing where I need to be able to say, look, here's an idea that I have, and does anybody else have any ideas? Or what do other people think about that idea? Or how would we build upon that idea? So so I'm not saying that I ought to, that I'm not that I as a manager or leader of my organization, I'm what I do is important, and I have responsibilities, and I have presumably some experience and some expertise to bring to the team. So I'm not saying withhold that. Um, I'm saying kind of own that and acknowledge that, but at the same time, that sense of, if you think about
Yes.
humility, to be humble, to be grounded, is the recognition is that this this might be a good idea, but but it might not be, or it might be the start of a good idea, and we can build upon it. And what started out as blue turns into be kind of a shade of teal green. But
Yes.
yeah, but we had to get started, uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
and and that's where I think you can find the balance. And part of in the notion of what I say you matter, then is again we talk about it as modeling the way. It's about trying to be clear about my personal values and what's important to me and my convictions. What would I be willing to be convicted for? What do I stand for? Um, what would I be? What won't I compromise? Um, and I need to be clear about that so that I can make sure that my actions are consistent. So that here's the book that we're writing, Tom. So we're writing a
Uh-huh.
book called The Radical Promise. Do what you say you will do. That's the next book. Uh,
Are you serious? Are you writing a book on
yeah,
that
that's the working title for our next book.
for your next book? Where you will, can you share where you're going with that?
Well, it's about this. It's about this notion of making sure that there's a connection between what you say and what you do. You know,
Okay, yeah,
don't
integrity.
integrity. Don't make promises that you can't keep. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Do you think that, we talk a lot about in our leadership work about a leader's ability to identify what their values are, those things that matter most to them, and then be able to communicate that to others.
right.
Are you finding that either in the work that you're doing at Santa Clara or the companies that you're working with, is that a given, or do leaders struggle with, well, what do I stand for? Because I think that's critical. Step one.
Um, well, sometimes yes. I mean, it's sometimes we haven't thought about how to put it into words. We all stand for something.
Yes, we do.
And if we don't know, oftentimes we could ask others, and they'll tell us based upon our actions. Well, Barry, based upon the way you behave, I believe these are your beliefs. And then I'm confronted by sort of saying, well, would I agree with that? But here's the truth. The truth is that people don't believe what we say; they believe what we do. The reason why I need to be clear about what's important to me is to make sure that what I say is consistent with the decisions I make, the way, if I say people matter, then there better be a whole host of things I do that demonstrate the time and effort I put into my relationships and the people that all the people that matter.
Yeah.
If I say alumni matter, but I don't spend any time or effort with alumni, I just say, well, they're really an important part of the university, but I'm spending well. So and I think here's the other piece of that we're not particularly comfortable in, and that is most of us are not particularly comfortable in talking about what's important to us. We
Hmm.
don't. There's not a natural forum for that. It's not like, well, we're going to do, we could do this, but we don't start every meeting by sort of saying, so Barry, remind me what would you say your three most important values are? But when we do some values clarification exercises, I find that some people um, find some very creative ways to remind themselves. So, one fellow recently, through a values exercise that we did, then he posted those values on a poster behind his desk. Somebody else put them on a coffee mug. Um, and one of the reasons for that is that then it other people who came in to his office or saw the coffee mug would ask about that, and then that individual have a chance to talk about it. Well, I'm glad you asked me about what I mean by integrity or what I mean by innovation. Why is that an important value? Now, I think when I'm recruiting new faculty members, one of the things I'm talking about is if you're going to join the faculty here at Santa Clara, you should know that these are some important values that we have. An education of the whole person, uh, a sense of being in service to others. That the research that we do is not just for research sake, but it's so that somebody can use can use our science to be able to improve themselves and their organizations. And if those things excite you, then then this might be a good place for you.
That's really interesting. It's like being real clear. That's a great example, Barry, around taking what your research indicates and the practices that you've identified, and then actually put them into play and be really clear up front. It's really that alignment piece. And I think organizations that do this well understand what the values are for their culture. It's not just having them on the wall, right? Well, that's not what we're talking about. We're actually how you model it and how you
Yeah.
show up.
And
Yeah.
and even if you're a hard driving executive or a hard driving culture, at least be clear about it. So Tom, if you join our organization, I want you to know we're very competitive. And we're gonna measure you every year, and every year the bottom 10% are going to be gone. And if that kind of environment excites you, this is a great place, because or if you're going to work, you're going to work in our investment company. We keep score, and here's how you get this, and so not everybody here is going to be your friend, because they're competing against you for limited resources.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the place I want to work, but at least if you're going to work in this place, you ought to know who we are and what we're about.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the things that was really, because the book that you wrote on trust and the one on credibility, where you double click those practices and dove deep on those, I found those to be really helpful in giving some insights, and I think it also underscores what you think is really important relative to where leaders need to be focused today, and then also going forward. And so, I was looking at the Edelman Trust Barometer. You see it's the 25th year, and trust is really low in organizations. When you look at business, government, media, and so there's a trust. I would translate that in, there's a trust crisis in organizations. And so what I'm hearing, that extending that you matter, that we can't do it alone, and then giving people that freedom to actually take more ownership and accountability is a way to build trust. Is that a correlated to the trust building aspect? Because we got to deal with this. I mean, this is not looking good.
Yeah, look, I mean, a piece of trust is, can I believe you? And again, this
Yeah.
the where trust goes away is, again, this disconnect between, well, Barry, you say we're a very family friendly organization, and yet I want to take Thursday afternoons off to coach my kids soccer team, and you tell me that's not going to be possible. uh, okay, well, that's disappointing, because I thought we were a really family friendly place with lots of flexibility. Uh, so I wonder what other things you're telling me that are really not true. I mean,
Yes.
you know
Yeah.
that's the piece that's the piece we're trying to write about in the new book, is don't make promises that you can't keep, because every time I say something, my audience, for at least initially, believes me. That's our general. We're not all quite so cynical yet. So our general default as humans is, when somebody tells us something, we generally, all things considered, we believe them. You know, when this product says it's going to do this, we believe it, and then we use the product, or we do what you asked me to do. You said to me, Barry, if I work over the weekend, I can take Thursday off. And then Thursday comes and you say, well, no, we're really busy, Barry. You can't take Thursday off. Well, okay, next time you ask me to work on the weekend and say you're going to give me a comp day, I'm 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 not going to believe you, or I'm going to want to take the comp day in advance. um, so so the trust issue is really this gap. I mean, it's the change, Tom, that's happened in organizations. The psychological contract that organizations once had with people, that you know, that, that you could work for this organization for your life, as long as you were doing a good job. And um, gosh, that's not the case these days. The
Yes.
contract, I think, these days is, and this is what we tell, our graduates is, your first job is, you're not going to be there that long. What It's just the nature of the workplace these days. So choose one of those. Choose a first job with an eye toward what can you learn, and therefore the organization contract is what can you teach. How can you develop this person over the 1 year, 2 years, 3 years that they're going to be with your organization before they move on. Uh, and in a macro sense, if we all did that, then we wouldn't have to worry about it. Everybody would be developing all these young people, and we'd all benefit when they move from A to B to C, and wherever it is that they go. Um,
So it's really that creating that learning culture, that learning and development as a way to. Man, one CEO that I interviewed, and his whole philosophy was, I want to develop them to the point where they are so marketable to the outside world that they don't want to leave. And I thought that was sort of a paradox to what we believe: invest in them, develop them, but then they're going to leave. It was completely counter to that logic, and
yeah.
that's what I'm hearing you say
Yeah,
is
gosh,
being it is,
if
yeah.
I can learn here, if I can continue to learn, and if I can continue to learn and grow in this organization, why would I want to go some other place?
So true. Yes.
So,
Yes.
um,
Yeah. I have a 26 and a 29-year-old who are working in corporate space, and even talking with them, they'll say, well, I don't know that, kind of that element of integrity, kind of they say one thing, but they actually do another thing. And they're talking to their friends, and what's doing for a lot of people is, I think that the quiet quitting thing that is just sort of like holding back a little bit, that we're not tapping into the full potential that these particularly young people have, that we're leaving it on the table. And I think you're on the right track on this Radical Promise book, because I think that's so critical. It really is.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's also interesting. I was reading a study recently that talked about young people, and of course, that's a big group, young.
Yes, right.
Um, they're not as interested in getting into senior positions in organizations. That's not their career aspirations, and part of this is a generational issue, because they're really looking for a balance in their lives, uh, which may have which may have been our fault. We worked so hard so that they could have all these choices and all these options. And now they're looking and saying, well, that's true, but I don't want to work as hard as my dad or my mom. I want to have
Totally.
more
Yeah.
balance in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not going to sell my soul to the organization because I know what
But,
happens.
you know,
So,
for the next generation.
yeah.
But there was a study recently of Girl Scouts, and the conclusion was that um, Girl Scouts, young girls and Girl Scouts want to change the world, but they don't want to be leaders. Now this is now a semantic kind of issue. I want to
Yes.
change the world, but I don't want to be a leader. Now that's leader in title. That's, I don't want to be the I don't want to be I don't want to be the boss.
Yes.
Uh,
It's defining leadership by the title. They
yeah,
want to define it by another metric. They want to, is what you're saying.
yeah, yeah, and
Impact.
it's why we've always talked about how these are the practices of exemplary leadership, and those who engage in these behaviors are exercising leadership regardless of their title, position, level of the organization, function, hair color, size and shape. These
Right.
these are behaviors and practices that are available to anyone. And when you raise your hand and say, "Here's an idea that I have," that's an example of exercising leadership. And you don't have to be the boss to raise your hand. So
or have direct reports. You can be a
absolutely,
leader as an individual contributor in your own way, just by virtue of raising your hand and taking action and
yeah,
creating movement.
yeah,
I think that's going to be more of a definition around leadership as we move forward. That more sort of
yeah,
influence and creating a movement and creating motivation in others. And you don't have to
yeah. Making things
be
happen.
the boss to do that. Yeah, making things happen.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. One thing that I did want to, this thing called credibility, if I could sort of circle back to that. Um, One of the things that we see, particularly with emerging leaders and younger folks, of saying, I don't have that. Maybe I lack some of the confidence because I'm not as competent as I need to be. So there's this hesitancy here, and yet credibility is, we define it as sort of walking the talk, meaning that you put it out there and you model the way, and we're consistent. I can rely upon you. I don't have to second guess. And I think that's more related to credibility than actually how much you know, because I think competence or knowledge, you need to know technical aspects. You need to know how to do certain things from a business perspective. But so much of leadership is now related to your ability to influence, kind of the social intelligence side, the ability to care and connect
sure.
and listen and all of that. You see that as well in some of the research you're doing
Yeah,
as well.
the one of these other kind of truth is it people won't care about you unless they think you care about them, and trust in that regard is a you have to ante up first. You can't sort of say, well, trust me. It's, well, why should I trust you? Well, here's what I'm going to do to show you why you should trust me. um, and that willingness to go first. I'm going to demonstrate that I trust you by giving you this assignment, by letting you talk to that customer, by going into the lab and trying this experiment, see where that takes us. Um, I think our research, going back, 3 or 4 decades, is we've asked the question. So, um, so what do you look for? What are the personal values, traits, or characteristics you look for in somebody that you'd be willing to follow? So we didn't say a leader per se, but
Hmm.
someone that you'd be willing to follow. And willing is a really important issue. That so you don't have to do what this person says, but you would do what this person says. What personal traits or characteristics would be important? And what we find through the decades, and no matter what language we ask the question in, people want to follow people who, first of all, are honest. The sense of I can believe in them, I can trust them. We want to follow people who are competent, who know what they're talking about. And by the way, you don't have to be competent in everything. And particularly as you move up in the
Right.
organization, you know, you really want to hire, you want to hire people that are smarter than you,
Yeah, absolutely.
because that's the way you're going to be smarter. So honest and competent are important. We want people who are, um, well, we use the word, that are inspirational. But if you look at the behavior that causes people to be inspirational, is they're positive, they're enthusiastic, they're upbeat, uh, they're contagiously enthusiastic, they're energetic. That's
Yes. Yeah.
it's not, to inspire, to breathe life into. How do we get other
Yes.
people excited? By
Yeah.
being excited ourselves.
They
And then
energize people. It's kind
yeah,
of an
and then
energetic, and yeah,
that
yeah.
fourth characteristic is we want to follow people who are forward looking. We want to follow people who are going someplace, who have a sense of direction. And it's interesting because the first three characteristics, honest, competent, and inspiring, in some ways define credibility, but don't define credibility from a leadership perspective per se. The leadership perspective comes in when you have a point of view. So I can have, I can say my colleagues are very credible, but but if I ask them, what do you think we should be doing? I don't know, or I don't want to think about that, or it's not my responsibility. But the person that becomes credible as a leader is the person who says, well, I think we ought to go north, and here's my reasons for that, or here's why I don't think we should be going south, or we ought to be making this change. And the scary part of that is that you never get 100% of the votes, whenever. But the good news is you don't need 100%. You just need one more vote than the other. The recent budget that passed in the House by one
Mhm.
vote. That's all you needed was one more vote than the other side, and things moved forward. Um, so you really just need a small group of people that sort of say, yeah, this makes sense. I want to go with you. Um, so honest, competent, forward-looking, and inspiring. Then define in some ways what we look for in people that we'd be willing to follow. And Tom, we ask then people to sort of say, well, how have you demonstrated, your honesty and trustworthiness through your behaviors? What are you doing to demonstrate your competency, or to build your competency? What are the workshops you're going to? What are the program? What are you learning? Um, how do you make, this might for some people have to do with health, but how do you make sure that you can maintain, and when we here's just a tangent. When we look at the evaluations that students give of faculty, there's like
Yes.
20 different characteristics, and then eventually the student will say, compared to all other instructors, this person is, top 5%, 10%, whatever it might be. Those who get the 20 characteristics, the one that predicts the overall score the most is the question: this instructor is enthusiastic about his or her subject matter. I mean, and then you look at that and you go, so that's what I tell the faculty. I said, look, the most important thing that the students want to know is that you think calculus is exciting. You think chemistry is absolutely critical for the world's progress, whatever it might be. You need to be an evangelist for English literature. Whatever the subject is. If you're not enthusiastic about it, if you don't care about it, if you don't think it's really critical that everybody read this book, knows this art piece, whatever it is, it's hard to imagine that anybody in your audience, anybody in your class, is going to get very excited. Um, so uh, so so part of that is to get out of, I'm going to stereotype here, get out of the library school of management. It doesn't have to be. The idea here in the library is not to keep the books on the shelves. It's not to keep, not to keep everybody quiet. It's to get everybody kind of roaming. It's when you bring the kindergarten kids in, and they want to tear all the books off the shelves and look at
Yeah.
all those
Yeah.
books. That's
Yeah.
that's what we'd like to see adults do.
This is so fascinating. So that honesty, competent, but I'm not, there's a growth mindset element in when you talk about competent, and
Yes.
there's a curiosity element of that. If I don't know the answer, I'm going to go figure it out. It's a very, you don't have to know it all. And I think sometimes that gets confused when we talk about competence. I think it's an organic dynamic aspect, which is the whole learning organization, and then the inspirational about really being energetic
Yeah.
and excited about it. You love what you do. And the cool thing about what you've been doing over all these years, Barry, that I've really sort of been very respectful of the work that you're doing is you like the leadership challenge came out early on, and then you're in your seventh edition. Is that what it is now?
Yeah.
I mean, so you keep, and then you're talking about radical promise. You're talking about the second edition of encouraging the heart. You stay in. You must love what you do because you're constantly adding to, as opposed to publishing a book and then just let it write its course.
Well, one of my favorite things to say at graduation is I hope that you'll so love what you do that you'll never have to work, right?
Brilliant.
And
Yep.
And when my peers retire, oftentimes they retire because they're no longer enjoying the work that they're doing. Uh, and so they want to do something else, and that's fine. That's fine. But gosh, as long as you really enjoy what you're doing, um, then 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 share that enjoyment. Share that enjoyment. Let me just echo one of the comments that you made here, Tom. Uh, I was with a group of seniors recently, and they were sort of saying, "So what, what's one of the things that's really important to me, going to be important to me throughout my career?" And
Hmm.
you use this word. I want to emphasize it. It's remaining curious. I think that's really an important characteristic, because as long as we're always curious, it causes us to be interested in what's out there, what's new, what's happening. That's what causes us to read more, to pay attention to what's going on, to to um, to study, to put ourselves out there because we're curious. It's what causes us to listen more to other people, because we don't know everything and we're curious. Well, how does that work? What is AI today? It's like I'm not an expert, but I'm you know but I, and I'm probably and I'm not going to become an expert, but I'm curious, and curious about its applications, and curious about so what do you do with that, and how do you see that impacting your business, and what's going on, and that I think being curious is a wonderful attribute to carry through our lives. And I can't help but think, you keep doing these interviews because you're curious to talk with different people and see what they have to say.
I find it really fascinating to get people's perspective from all different angles and all walks of life. Yes, you're absolutely right. So, if you were giving since we are in graduation season, or we certainly just finished that, would curiosity be a key message as a great?
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely, yeah. Be curious. Find something that you love. Find someone that you love. Uh,
yeah,
stay in love. Uh, 7 editions of the Leadership Challenge. There's only been one example that we've kept through all 7 editions. So I mean, every time we do a new edition, we update the research. You know, context changes. You know, 40 years ago we weren't talking about AI. We weren't talking about
right.
COVID. We weren't talking about social capital. So times change, but there's only one story that we've continued to tell, and we use it to close the book. And we quote uh, Brigadier General John Stanford, who told us about the secret to success in life, and John was not only a decorated military uh, uh, officer. He had been superintendent for Fulton County when we hosted the Summer Olympics in 1976. Uh, John had been superintendent of public education for Seattle, Washington, and throughout all of these things, we sort of asked John at one point, in our interviews, what was the secret to success in life, and this comment has resonated with us through all those editions. And he said the secret to success in life is to stay in love. He says, I don't know any other fire, any other thing that is more exciting and exhilarating than this feeling of love. And we close the book with that sort of notion that it's hard to imagine that leaders can get up and put in the hard work that it takes to make a difference unless they were kind of in love with what they were doing, in love with the people they were working with the customers and people that they were serving. Um, so it goes back to, all the stuff, putting it in, it's got to be, put it in your heart.
Yeah. It's the passion,
Yeah.
it's the energy, it's the will to keep you going.
Yeah.
And I think that is love is there was only one CEO that I remember, Alan Mulally, when he took over Ford. He was talking about love people up and love what we're doing, and he was the first one that I'd heard that had used that term, and I've thought about that a lot, similar to your example of being, that is absolutely so relevant. And we tend to sort of zero in all this stuff that we've got to do. But as leaders, we've got to zero in on a few
and
elements.
and love is not easy.
Yeah.
We're not talking about all this conversation, Tom, for our time together, not all this soft stuff. I mean, if you just take something like love, it's hard. It's hard to be in love. It's hard to stay in love, and it takes a lot of time and energy. It's easier to break up uh, than to work through
Or quit. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
and in these
Yeah.
tough times, it really is important to kind of be able to put your heart into it, because if not, then you give up. So
Most definitely. Barry, the reason why I wanted to invite you to join in on the conversation is because you've been studying and researching leadership and teaching leadership and working with companies for, gosh, a long time, 40 plus years of your great work. And you've kept current, and you've really looked at how does leadership fit into the current context. And I love how you have done a great job of making it relevant, and while also threading through the truths that remain regardless of the context and the environment in which leaders are leading today. And so I thank you for the insights. This has been an absolute treat.
my pleasure. Nice talking with you, and I hope all of your listeners will also have enjoyed our conversation today.
I think they will. So thanks again. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
All right. That is a wrap for this episode. Hey, a big thank you goes out to Barry for sharing his best practices, those enduring truths that have been around for the last 40 years, those principles that we can rely upon as relevant today, as well as being relevant tomorrow as we look towards the future. What some of those enduring truths are that have made it and endured through the different market cycles and business cycles and the pandemic and new technologies and innovation. And I think those principles are very core that we can grab onto, and knowing that they are relevant and effective today as well as tomorrow. A big part of our discussion did zero in on the importance of trust, integrity, and why leaders need to align their actions with their values. And he shared a little bit about his upcoming book that he's writing with Jim Kouzes that focuses on the importance of integrity, honesty, and keeping your promises. I jotted down a few of those enduring truths or principles that I think are noteworthy. Number one, people want to be seen, heard, and appreciated. We know this, and yet sometimes in our busyness of our day-to-day, we get distracted and we don't give people the attention. It would behoove all of us to slow down a little bit so that we are able to listen and see others and appreciate others, because there's potential out there that is not even being tapped into. And so that's an enduring truth. Number two, leadership is about relationships and connections, and that leaders need to convey to others that they do matter because we can't do it alone. Number three, the best leaders are those who empower others. They are able to loosen the grip of control and challenge others to step outside their comfort zones and try new things and really take some of that ownership that's so critical to the execution part. Number four, we talked about trust is built through consistent actions, not just words, and that leaders really do need to model their values and convictions. Number five, we talked about effective leadership requires both confidence and competence and humility. It's not an either or. Number six, we talked about the importance of curiosity and how that drives engagement and innovation in organizations. And number seven, he said that you have to love what you do and the people that you work with, and that in his opinion, that is the key to long-term success. So great ideas, a really great review of those enduring principles and truths. And so thank you, Barry, for spending some time with us. If you've enjoyed today's episode, we ask that you follow us on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're so inclined, leave us a rating or follow us and subscribe, because your support actually does help others discover this podcast. Leadership isn't easy, and yet it's one of those most rewarding challenges that we can take on today. And so remember, it does matter how you show up each and every day. So go out and lead with that courage, lead with integrity, and that honesty, lead with authenticity, and of course, humility. Until next time, thanks for listening.